One of the things that we find that is easiest in terms of altering the sound coming from our guitar is the use of different strings, different tensions, different materials. In fact, the number of variables is actually kind of daunting. So I figured I would pick the brain of a concert artist, my guitar teacher, Colin Davin, and we sat down and we talked about all things strings. But before we get to hear his opinions, please subscribe to this channel. Also, you should visit nylonplucks.com/string theory to see a full article all about this issue. He's also the co-chair of the guitar department at Cleveland Institute of Music here in Cleveland, Ohio. For those who are just beginning, let's start with that. Why don't we ask, how often should one change their strings?
Well, I think that the question around changing strings and how frequently is very much dependent on how much you're playing. So some people will say, oh, once a week, but it depends how much you practice in that week. So I would say I change my strings if I'm getting as much practice as I would like, 3 to 4 hours a day. Then I'm changing my strings certainly every week and maybe even a little more frequently than that. So let's see, that's
sounds like 20 hours.
25 hours
okay.
of good solid play on a set of strings. Of course, it takes a little time for the strings to break in also, and so sometimes you have a pretty narrow window of the real sweet spot. So certainly if I have concerts or recording sessions, I'm probably changing them right before, maybe a couple days before, just to get them to settle in but still stay fresh.
Secrets for getting your string to stay in tune without having to wait days and days and days.
Yeah.
And it was sort of counterintuitive, as I recall.
Right. Yeah. Well, one of the things, I mean, anyone who's put on a fresh set of strings, especially on a classical guitar, you'll notice, of course, that they slip flat rapidly and irreparably, seemingly. So actually the thing that tends to get them stable is to tune them down below pitch, sometimes substantially below pitch, either by physically tuning them or by stretching out the string, and then bring it back up. And if you do that a couple of times in a row, when I, for example, in that recording session, I needed that string to be good right away. So I used the peg winder and I got it up to pitch, kind of gradually. You don't want to go too quick and freak out the top or the bridge. And then I tuned it down about an octave, and then I tuned it back up to pitch, and then I stretched it out with my hands. Then I tuned it down, then I tuned it back up, and it kind of settled. That's kind of the shortcut version. I think if I'm not immediately needing it to settle for that day, then I might be a little more deliberate about it. But still, I stretch out the string and tune it down and back up a few times.
Right. Because I would have thought one tuned it above pitch and then let it stretch back. But this is sort of the opposite of that.
Yeah. Sometimes I'll leave it maybe a quarter step or maybe a half step, but with higher tension strings, you don't want to go too high. So maybe a quarter step sharp in the case overnight. I don't know if that really helps that much, but I certainly by the next day it will have settled back down, probably below pitch, but yeah.
One thing I noticed is that my basses seem to get dead earlier than my trebles. So do you change half sets or do you just go for full sets?
Sometimes. Again, it's dependent on what my needs are at the given moment. If I've got concerts, then I want my optimal string condition all the way across all six. Then I'm probably changing my basses more frequently. The wound string definitely will wear down quicker. But I noticed that, for example, my first string, my high E string, tends to get a little scratchy right around where I'm plucking it most often. And so that string I find I want to change sometimes also extra. And being the brightest string, I think a lot of potential flaws from wear are really exposed, really noticeable. So I'm changing the first string a little bit extra sometimes, certainly the basses. And then if I'm just in a period where I'm practicing and teaching and don't necessarily have to be out on stage or in a studio, then I'll just change all six together just for inventory simplicity. But it's great. Now, you can buy half sets of strings and even individual strings very easily. from any number of merchants. Strings by mail is the big one here in the U.S. that a lot of people use, and you can very easily get your half sets there.
The other thing I wanted to not forget is the peg winder. Bringing up the peg winder again for beginners. Definitely get a peg winder. I mean, again, anything that interferes with your what would be called your desire to change strings or your tendency to change strings should be avoided. So make your life easy and get a peg winder.
But also avoid probably the mechanical electric screwdriver style peg winders. They have some that are motorized that'll get you in tune like that. But if you're not extremely careful, you can snap the string right off or even cause some tension problems in your instrument.
Yeah, and a guitar.
And those tools are best left to the professionals, meaning the professional string changers, the luthiers and repair people, and anyone who works in setting up guitars, anything like that. They're changing strings probably multiple times every single day, and they know how to use those tools. Right. So, but the analog version is just fine. So, yeah.
Is there any particular recommendations you have in terms of things to do or not to do, like we just mentioned?
I mean, one thing is to have something that'll protect the top of your guitar. Certainly, there's the risk of snapping a string, so just having some soft cloth. There are specialized products also, kind of, I think they're called string bibs or something like that.
Yeah, I've seen something like that.
That kind of fit right around the bridge. I don't use anything like that. I just put my kind of microfiber cloth that I would use to polish the guitar, just lay that down. Sometimes there's also risks when you're tying off the strings at the bridge. There's a risk that you might kind of scrape into the top there, depending on what your technique for tying strings is.
Right.
So I would say, kind of protect the top of your instrument as you're changing strings.
Like both sides of the bridge, right?
Yeah. I think a little riskier on the underside beneath where the string would go, but certainly.
Yeah, because I noticed, because I do the underside, and I've got quite a number of little scrapes in the top side.
I even have a really nice one that's been polished over, but it's now just a discoloration.
Because I never thought about putting it above, but I did do that too.
Yeah. So that's one of them. Also, give your strings a haircut right away. I always like to keep things looking neat. So just trimming the excess off as I go and keeping track of that.
One thing I found, I was always using, because I thought, well, strings like wire. I was using wire cutters to trim my strings, but I actually found that using fingernail clippers is way easier.
It works fine. It'll wear down your nail clippers. Well, a lot of peg winders now will have a little guillotine for your string clippings.
Right. There you go.
Yeah. So that's what I use now, is the peg winder. The other side
makes
of it.
Sense. Yeah. All right. So I think we got the changing thing. So the idea is, depending, I suppose, on how intense you practice, how much you sweat, all that sort of thing, somewhere between 20 and 30 hours seems like a reasonable place to change strings, time to change strings.
Sure, yeah. And I would say even if you're not performing very often, still change the strings with some regularity, both for the health of your instrument. There's some evidence that an instrument will absorb the sounds that you put into it over time. So that, gets to certainly the way one plays and produces sounds. So you want to be playing with a nice, good, rich tone if you can. But changing the strings regularly is essential to that. If I'm playing on dead or scratchy strings, I cannot get my tone. So keeping that up, and it's just more enjoyable too. I mean, there's nothing like realizing that you're a few days or a week late on changing your strings. Like when you change your strings finally and say, "Oh, I don't sound terrible."
You're right.
Cool.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and for those of you like me who are trying to find the right string, it gives you all the more opportunity to try different sets.
Yeah,
so that's great. And so I assume, again, just to cover this because it does come up, you've never taken your basses off and put them in some solution and put them back on again. I know. That's really the shoestring budget approach.
Sure. Yeah. So. I know there are some people who intentionally don't give their strings a haircut. So they have the extra slack, and they'll actually take the string off when it wears down and turn it around. So the scratchy side is now down here. I don't know if that works.
Right. Yeah, they're not most strings are not that expensive, but we'll get into that.